Something I had recently been chatting with my guides about was ways, ideas, brainstorming on how I can create more space in my life experience. And what I mean by this is more space for peace of mind, more space for having a little bit of harmony between my, let's say, work life and my home life, allowing myself to have a little bit less stress, maybe a little bit less anxiety or a little bit less worry, and instead focusing and pouring myself more into the present moment of now and hosting beautiful space for things to basically be manifested into my 3D. I feel like this is a practice that we never get to the end destination. It's kind of a progressive adventure, and eventually we do get into at least some sort of cadence or rhythm to identify the things that help us or empower us to create more space. And then we can kind of micro build habits, if you will, and again, get into that harmony that we're all really seeking. And allow me to also say that my guides affectionately reminded me of that not every being, every human being, is going to have the same ideas or have the same go to plan or actions or activities in order to create space. They may actually be different. And what I think is beautiful is that it's recognizing our individual harmonies, because I don't believe that all of us are the same. And each one of us is going to have little nuances or a little more here or there. This is why I'm using the phrase work-life balance. The word balance is really subjective. To one person or being, it might be at certain levels, or let's say you work a certain amount of hours or you pour a certain amount of effort or energy into something, where someone else, they might not have to, or they might not want to. So this allows for, and what I replaced it with is work-life harmony. So creating that harmony in your life experience of whatever that may be. And how I would often see this manifested is, let's say someone, decides to have a child, and now their schedule looks a whole lot different than when they were unpartnered or when they took on a new project or maybe did some traveling. There's different points of our life experience where our harmony also changes. So allow me to also invite the contemplation that things may change or evolve or continue to hopefully expand and get more and more authentic and centered. But it may change or shift just a little bit or a lot. So my guides provided me with 4 ideas. And so I wanted to bring them here for y'all to contemplate, to consider. Maybe one of these may serve you, maybe all 4 serve you, maybe none serve you. But no matter what, journeying through these with me will allow you to contemplate your current habits or harmonies and decide if something may need maybe a little tune-up or a little improvement to better harmonize with what's going on in your current life experience. Number 1 is to observe your thoughts. I know this sounds way more simple than sometimes it ends up being. But for me, it's been really beneficial to begin to really step into the seat of the observer and to kind of go back into that consciousness and sit and look and listen and see if I hear certain things or I hear certain words or phrases or things kind of pop up into my mind, maybe who they might be coming from. Because we have a couple of different representations. Maybe it's our inner child. Maybe it's what I affectionately called kind of an old record playing in the background. And the play button always gets pushed when maybe we're in a more anxious state or a more concerned state. Or it could be the inner parent. It could be our divine guidance, our guides, things that are coming down and kind of dropping in, intuitive taps. For me, I think one of the largest maybe successes that I had in being able to actually observe is to kind of make it a game. I started off very simple, and I put, let's say, the voice in my head or the thoughts that would pop in or the things I would hear, I would kind of put them into 2 categories. And one would be divine thoughts. So things imagined that are coming, let's say, from above into our mind, into our brain. And then things that maybe come from our heart, from our body, from us, coming up from our heart into our mind or our brain. And the tough part is that because we're using one set of equipment, think of it this way, that we are blessed with, but it is one set of equipment. So, what then also may transpire is that the voice that you hear in your head or the thoughts that kind of come through, they sound similar. Because essentially, as I like to think about it, it's kind of like there's a speaker and all of the audio, kind of transmission is coming through that speaker. So whether it's coming from above or it's coming from within, it sounds the same or it sounds really similar. So I'm going to give you some quick tips on things that helped me help to kind of delineate maybe receiving information divinely, or maybe some old records or ego or inner child, or who knows, maybe my deepest, most profound wishes, whatever it may be. So the first difference you may hear is a cadence. And for me, this is one of the biggest ones. So when I have a divine kind of transmission or something kind of drops in, it's very gentle and it's very rhythmic. It's not hurried. It's very systematic. It's like a lullaby, where if something is coming from me, or maybe it's coming from my ego, it might be at a more hurried pace or a more urgent cadence of like, oh my gosh, this happened. Where something for me that's more divine happens kind of just more chill and harmonious and rhythmic. So even though the sound may be actually the same, I can start to tell the difference because of the cadence in the messages that I'm receiving. Another key one for me is the vocabulary or the words that are received or chosen. So I notice that like some of my old records that used to play from childhood, things that maybe my parents or other authoritative figures, teachers, etc., would say repeatedly, and then it would become a record that I would play in my head. The vocabulary was different. It was maybe harsher or more judgmental. Or for me, there was actually a couple of words that would help me immediately identify that record versus something that's kind of more divinely dropping in. And what I would do to kind of see this too is I would actually just write it down. So for like a week, I committed to having like a little notebook, or I would put it in my phone in a note. If I would hear something or suddenly, start thinking something, I would actually just write it down. And I wouldn't worry about analyzing it or looking at it. I would just keep writing things down. And I'll talk about this here in a second because this is one of the 4 items that my guides absolutely reminded me of again. And this is not the first time that they have. Thank you for the reminder, y'all. But if you are able to kind of, funny enough, create some space in this space to see what the messages are that you're receiving, and then maybe take a look at them from a different lens, you're able to start to discern some of the different voices or some of the different beings or some of the different representations of those that are prominent in our life experience. The other difference, if you will, is the approach. So often I got to know my ego voice very well, and she is fabulous, but she is intense. And so often her approach in things that need to be done, or I need to do, or I need to think about, or hey, this is what's happening, it's really intense. Do it now. This is urgent. Everything is a 4-alarm fire. If I'm not doing it already, what am I doing? Versus if I receive something from my guides, it's kind of more of this like gentle suggestion. So it's like, hey, I wonder if that's what it is, or that might be that. It's like, So it's kind of more gentle in its approach. Also, anything that's time sensitive, unless, I've definitely received divine guidance at times of like, do this now, right? Or right now, like something emergency, urgent, take action. That still feels different than my ego. It still sounds different than my ego. It's kind of making a study of these voices instead of lumping them all together, which is way too easy to do. And last is kind of piggybacking on the approach, but it's any emotions that are behind it or any inflection in the voice. What I found is that my ego would be more emotionally tied and more ultimatum driven. And a lot of this came from my earlier life experience. So I was able to pinpoint it pretty quickly. But if I noticed that there was a lot of emotion behind it, and it would also, for me, trigger a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings, suddenly a rush of adrenaline or a rush of intensity, where something that's divine for me may have a real intensity to it, but it's for me, a very grounded, kind of solidifying, anchoring feeling, even though it does have intensity. It's making a study of the science of some of these thoughts and the things, the messages that you're receiving to help then create some space between you and those thoughts. Because I think often when they're delivered, we don't study the differences and understand who's speaking. And instead, we just think all of it is us and we just start reacting. And then we go through our days exhausted and frustrated, just don't know what to do. Like, why is this happening? So I feel like it's really powerful to be in a position where you can create some space between you and your thoughts, and also empower yourself to know when it is time to take action, when it's time to write something down, or when it's time to contemplate something further. So, number two, my guides had reminded me of this. I've leveraged this for a while. It's something that's tried and true. It's sleeping on a decision. Would you allow me to just sleep on this decision? I'll come back to you tomorrow in the morning, or, by noon. What I would find is that this would allow me the opportunity to not have this anxiety, pressure feeling, and instead have some space to breathe some air into it and allow for other things like perspective, or honestly, even my own feelings. Because often for me, I would focus on what other people need and what I need to do to help them. But I also need to focus on myself and what's helpful for me. This empowers me to be the best version of me for everyone else. I would use this in my old corporate job. I use this daily unless there really is something that I cannot do that, or I am at such a centered piece on making that decision that I don't need to provide myself the additional space. I will humbly admit, normally I will still do it just because it helps me center myself in the decisions that I make, allowing yourself to not have to do something. And obviously, again, there are scenarios and circumstances where we need to, and that's okay. But all decisions do not need to be made like that. There are some that can allow for a little bit of space, a little bit of flexibility, again, provide us that runway and that ability to look at it from different angles before we put the gavel down and make the decision. Number three, this is a really big one, if I'm honest. When my guides had shared this with me, I was like, gosh, this one is one of the most powerful for me. It is considering another perspective or opinion. And when I say another, it's ideally two or more. So if you're going to make a decision or you're looking to do something, you can probably pretty easily select the opposite of that thing. So let's say I'm going to make a decision to change my diet. The opposite would be I don't change it. I continue to eat the things that I'm eating or make the food choices that I'm making. But what's more challenging, and for me also provides me more space and clarity, is somewhere in between there. So let's say in this example, I can either change my diet completely, I can change it, nothing at all, or I can find kind of a sweet spot that maybe I start with my proteins, or I start with my breakfast, or if my goal is to eat more organic foods, maybe I'm going to switch out just a couple at a time. So it's kind of like that in between point. And what this empowers us to do is to get into a different vantage point. I like to talk about the vantage point of our guides. So if we are at ground zero in our humanness, and our higher self, let's say, is at 10,000 feet or up to 100,000 feet. Our guides hang out at least 100,000 feet. Maybe source is at 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 or whatever it is, right? We can get granular into what resonates most deeply with us. But if we take the decision or take the action and we look at it through these different lenses and start to consider, if I did do it right now in this perspective, what would my higher self say? What would my guides say? If I were to take a wild guess, what would source's perspective be? If you've had a QHHT session, what would my SC say? So you have these different vantage points with perspective because it allows and provides that space for the perspective. And so often when I make a larger decision in my life, if I'm honest, the success that I've had in many ways, if I'm pretty solid and like, look, I'm going to change my diet. It's happening. It's not a big deal for me to just deal with totally different food. I won't miss it, et cetera, et cetera. Then I will just make it happen. Because as we know, anytime we make a decision on something, it is instant. Unless we believe that it's not, or we are having a hard time changing our beliefs or laying our beliefs down and realizing that something is different, it is actually different. Even if it's one vibrational stair that you moved to a different vibrational stair. So if we're looking at the kind of perspective, for me, I've had such great success in finding that middle ground. So it's not necessarily what I'm considering. It's not the opposite, but it's somewhere in between. I'm going to start with baby steps. I'm going to start with this little thing first. I'm going to do this. And once I get into a rhythm of this, then I'll add another thing. And consider it from those perspectives. What would be the pluses and minuses, if you will? What would make it successful? How could you work through your emotions, your own perspective on that change from those different perspective points? It's a really interesting exercise. And if I'm very honest with you, for me, it has changed a lot for me because it's also allowed me to create some space that it's not an ultimatum. And I think as humans, we automatically go to the black and white. We have a hard time with the gray. The in between, no, it's too difficult. I'm good. I'll just figure it out. But it doesn't need to be like that. Again, always there's circumstances that it does. But on the average, it does not. And last but certainly not least, to me, this is one of the prizes that I feel that I have won in my life. So my guides shared this with me originally. I think it was probably about a year ago now. And it was take everything that you receive and collect it as if each little fact, piece of information, whatever it is, messages you're receiving, you take each one as if it's a puzzle piece and you start to collect them. Or look at it as breadcrumbs. You're just receiving little pieces of things. And what starts to happen is that you get a little collection going. And if you take a moment, I would do at least 5 minutes a day, sometimes multiple times a day, depending on what's happening, but at least once a day, to go through this list of things that I've collected. So if I had some sort of drop-in thought, maybe I didn't even know where it came from, but suddenly it's there, I write it down. Or I get an idea. Like, ooh, that would be kind of cool. Yeah, I'll write that down. If somebody tells me something that I'm like, whoa, wow. And somehow that resonates within me. There's a truth within me that's like, that's a stellar idea. Or I've never thought about it like that, but I like that. Like, I want to do that. You start to collect all these little pieces and then you put them in like a document. For me, I had one on my phone, and I also at one point had a little notepad because it was fun to carry around the notepad, and then I could actually physically look at it. And for some reason, for me, sometimes if I can see my handwriting or see things written, I relate to it in a different way. But essentially, I would review these lists of things, and these things would empower me to create some distance from what I'm receiving and allow me to be a little bit more thoughtful and intentional upon taking action. For those of you that are familiar with human design, for myself, I am a peer generator. So as a peer generator, my role in life, in my life experience, is to respond. And what this means is that I also don't respond to every single thing that happens. Because imagine if I'm getting all these inputs of like, oh, do this and I should do that. And this is happening and this is cool and this is awesome. This also doesn't mean that I then have to do all those things because that would be exhausting. Instead, I would actually leverage this activity that they shared with me. They're like, just write everything down. and then look at it. Stack rank it, basically. What resonates with you? What thing on that list of 20 things is like lighting you up on the inside? And maybe there's some things that's like, man, this is so cool. But right now with my life experience and, my commitments in life or et cetera, I don't know how I would do it. That's okay. Write those notes down too. Essentially start to collect them. And I have an iPhone, so I ended up setting up a shortcut that every time I clicked a button, it would open a new Apple Note and it would put in automatically the date and the time. And I call them CTMs. So came to me or come to me. So these thoughts come to me. And whether they're from above or they're from within, wherever they're from, I look at it later. I worry about it later. But obviously, as you start to get in this practice, you start to hear and observe. You're like, I see you, ego. I see you, guides. I know that's y'all. I would collect these thoughts then digitally. And this made it even better for me in the long run. And this is something that I still do even today, where I'm collecting these come to me thoughts. And then I go in and I reflect on this list of basically all of them. And it's really awesome because if I was like, gosh, I know I was thinking about something about, turkey, then I can actually go in there and search turkey and they'll come up. And hey, who knows? Maybe I have multiple come to me, notes that have turkey in it. It's empowered me to create space between those things that I receive. And if I also look at it from a human design perspective, I have open head and open ajna centers. They're undefined. So this means that I am highly receptive to not only divine drop-ins, so receiving from basically the ether, but my ajna being undefined means that I have openness in how I think about things. This means I might not think about things not even linearly, but similarly across subjects. So this subject, I might think about it totally differently, or this one, I think about it like completely opposite. And I'm very flexible, kind of like a chameleon. I can just kind of go in and think about things in a multitude of ways. And so what this has empowered me to do is not only create the space between my thoughts, be able to collect the thoughts together, and then review them and see them, and then think about them also from different perspectives. So for me, this number 4 is kind of like it's like a supercharged one because it is a thing in itself and you can create whatever you'd like to create. If you want to start with just a note in your phone that you're constantly just adding things to, go for it. If you want to do voice notes, go for it. If you want to have a little journal, whatever works for you. But by getting them out of our mind and getting them onto something, a piece of paper, a digital screen, a list of some sort, you are able to create space between yourself and your thoughts. And it's not so reactionary. My favorite part of this activity is that it actually helps me with my mental, basically, RAM. It helps me process my thoughts differently so that I am not having to exhaust all of my resources with just fielding all of the things that I receive. Instead, it's just about just kind of collecting them and putting them into a sort for later bucket or putting them in these 2 categories that allows me to think about them or see them differently. And then intentionally sit down, look at them, kind of stack rank them, if you will, against my heart in what's most important for me to do or take action upon. So what I'd love to place in your hands as we depart is an invitation to contemplate how can you create, carve out, even just the smallest of space, a little additional space. Because the more space we create, I mean, even in a sense of releasing things, letting things go. My guides have said multiple times, you don't realize that when you let something go, you create a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. So if there's something missing, the universe is going to try to fill it in. And what this can mean for you is that what it's filled in with is actually closer. It's like taking little baby steps, right? We're getting closer and closer to something that you would like, you are trying to invite in, you would love to experience. So you're actually receiving more, and you're receiving more of what you value, what you desire, versus trying to hang on to something that you've had for a long time or you don't know what else to choose. And so you're kind of grabbing on with both hands. There's a lot of energy that goes into holding on. But when we release, we actually create more space. And this does, for us humans, also create maybe a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of like, oh my gosh, now there's all this space. Like, what do I fill it in with? Like, what, now I feel smaller and the room feels bigger. But that's evolution, that's growth. And as my guides have affectionately shared, and I'll unpack in a future episode, Bashar has said this as well, that what we think is actually our ceiling to, let's say, our guides or our higher selves is actually just the floor. And so if we look at it like that this is what we're continuing to do. We establish the floor, we grow to the ceiling, and then that becomes our floor. And then we can grow to the ceiling. And that becomes our floor. We grow to the ceiling, right? So we're constantly evolving, changing, expanding, because as we know, the only constant in life is change. And that's what it looks like. And the intervals in which you go from basically floor to ceiling, right? Floor to ceiling, floor to ceiling, it could be, let's say, longer or more expansive, like as far as time or effort or energy, or it could be really rapid. I mean, you're just climbing those stairs essentially, or you're climbing those levels like wild. But when we create more space, we create more space for opportunity. And not only just vertically, we create it also horizontally. And we start to create more and more space, which opens and opens. And as we create more space, we can receive more. We can receive bigger things. We can receive things that have more gravity, that have more expansiveness, because we're constantly stretching and growing. So, as the point of contemplation for today is, where can you create more space? And how can you see space as a beautiful, wonderful, expansive thing? Because it absolutely is. You are not losing something because you are letting something go. You are allowing more space so that you can receive more. And that's what I send to you, my dear friend. So much love and light. And may your expansions be ever as exciting as what you receive.